Hello, welcome back to the Giant Papist, where we judge not by appearances but by the sanity of one's doctrine. For this installment in the Gospel reading and reflection for the season of Lent, we are going to be covering the Gospel for the Thursday of the second week of Lent, which is from Luke chapter 16, verses 19 to 31. The famous parable of the rich man and Lazarus. So, without further ado, let us get to the lesson. At that time, Jesus taught this parable to the Pharisees. There was a rich man who was clothed in purple and fine linen, and who feasted sumptuously every day. And at his gate lay a poor man named Lazarus, full of sores, who desired to be fed with what fell from the rich man's table. Moreover, the dogs came and licked his sores. The poor man died and was carried by the angels to Abraham's bosom. The rich man also died and was buried. And in Hades, being in torment, he lifted up his eyes and saw Abraham far off and Lazarus in his bosom. And he called out, Father Abraham, have mercy upon me, and send Lazarus to dip the end of his finger in water and cool my tongue, for I am in anguish in this flame. But Abraham said, Son, remember that you in your lifetime received your good things, and Lazarus in like manner evil things. But now he is comforted here, and you are in anguish. And besides all this, between us and you, a great chasm has been fixed, in order that those who would pass from here to you may not be able, and none may cross from there to us. And he said, Then I beg you, Father, to send him to my father's house, for I have 5 brothers, so that he may warn them, lest they also come into this place of torment. But Abraham said, They have Moses and the prophets. Let them hear them. And he said, No, Father Abraham, but if someone goes to them from the dead, they will repent. He said to him, If they do not hear Moses and the prophets, neither will they be convinced if someone should rise from the dead. Thus endeth the lesson. So, the context in which this parable is taught by Jesus, this is part of a larger discourse that begins with the multitudes accompany him and around chapter 14, verses 25. He begins teaching. The Pharisees object to tax collectors and sinners coming to Jesus, so he starts to tell a series of parables that include this one. And for this parable, the specific inciting incident was a certain group of the Pharisees, quote, who were lovers of money, heard all this, namely Jesus saying you cannot serve God and money at the same time, that they scoffed at him for teaching this to his disciples. And Jesus is not going to let them get away with it. He tells some harsh truths to them before nailing it home with the rich man and Lazarus. So, like many who have seen the musical Godspell, I had to avoid making certain comments while I was reading the parable, since this is one of the parables they act out in the musical. That when it came time, when it came to the point where I mentioned Jesus saying that the dogs licked the gaping wounds of Lazarus, I had to avoid going bleh in response. But that aside, we have the character of the rich man, who seems to be a representative of the specific group of Pharisees that objected to Jesus' teaching about the proper relationship between wealth and God. And rich man has nice clothes every day. He feasts sumptuously, but then we have a conflict in the story. The rich man continues to do all this, knowing that a poor, injured man is begging at his gate. The rich man knows Lazarus is begging him for help, begging him for medical aid, begging him for food, begging him to help him get back on his feet. And the rich man simply does not care. The rich man is, in this parable, is sinning against the virtue of charity. And it's not like Lazarus was asking for much. Lazarus would have been fine if the crumbs we discard off our table while we eat were given to him. To him, that would have been better than nothing. But yet, despite his suffering, his patient suffering, Lazarus nevertheless persists in trying to get the rich man to show him charity. But Lazarus dies before the rich man could act on charity and change his ways. And Jesus states that Lazarus was shown grace and mercy by God and got to be carried away to the bosom of Abraham. Does this change the rich man's behavior? No. Because when the rich man dies and got to afford the decency of having his body be buried, likely by his 5 brothers mentioned later at the end of the parable, Jesus states that unlike Lazarus, who gets to go to the bosom of Abraham, what reward does the rich man get when he dies? He gets to suffer in torment in the fires of Hades. Which seems to be at least in the Old Testament books, the wisdom literature seems to be synonymous with Sheol, which for the Jewish concept of the afterlife, pre-Christian age, where it is in general the untold place of stillness and darkness, which is death, much like the pagans at the time, regardless of whether you were righteous or wicked, you went to Sheol. But in the New Testament, referring to it as Hades, it is both the same thing as Sheol, and it is also the personification of the evil that it represents. So when Jesus is using Hades, there seems to be this sense of Hades being associated with where the wicked go, much like Gehenna in a spiritual sense is where the wicked went, even though Gehenna was a real life location on earth. Right, let me check one more thing. Right. Bosom of Abraham. Okay, this is the place of comfort within Sheol, within the realm of the dead, where the righteous dead await redemption. Yes, because it is common theological opinion that heaven was not yet opened in general to man after their death, with few notable exceptions, such as Enoch, Elijah, and according to some Jews, Moses. All right. Okay. Right. Back to the parables. Had to check a few notes on our spiritual locations. So, yes, in a sense, basically, you could understand it as Lazarus gets to go to heaven, the rich man goes to hell. Technically speaking, not quite that. The purpose of reflection, make it the point Jesus wishes to make. Sink. That's what we're going to go with for now until we have to remind ourselves of how it would have been understood when we get to the rich man's plea, which will be now. So, the rich man, he gets to see that the person he refused to show charity towards is in the part of Sheol that'll eventually be granted admittance into heaven while he is stuck tormented in flames. So, in a stroke of irony, he asks Abraham to have Lazarus show him mercy and give him water. This is ironic because when the rich man and Lazarus were both still alive, the rich man refused to do the same to Lazarus, but oh, have the tables turned. Now all of a sudden, charity and mercy seem like good things that the rich man once done, even though he himself did not practice it in his earthly life. The rich man, much like the group of Pharisees Jesus is criticizing by telling him this parable, is choosing to serve the pursuit of money rather than serve God. The rich man, much like the Pharisees, the specific Pharisees mentioned in this event in Luke's gospel, view money as an idol to be worshipped. And Abraham, he isn't showing sympathy to the rich man. He says it as it is. You were granted good things, Lazarus was not, but now you're in a place of torment while he gets to be in a place of comfort. And with that implicit, did you do good with the good things you were given? No, you did not. That is why you are here, and Lazarus is with me. And besides all this, Between us and you, a great chasm has been fixed in order that those who would pass from here to you may not be able, and none may cross from there to us. In other words, after we die, depending on the state of grace or lack thereof that we're in, our alignments, to borrow a D&D concept, become fixed. It is too late at that point. But the rich man does not give up, accepting that he will now be in torment for eternity as a consequence for his actions. And you can argue what his motivations for this next question might have been. He asks Abraham, okay, if Lazarus is not allowed to ease my torment here, then would you entreat God to permit him to appear to my five brothers so that they can change from their sinful ways, and they can repent from the sins that I committed that led me here, so that they might not be here with me. But Abraham, again, telling it as it is, that much like the rich man had, much like the Pharisees that Jesus is telling this parable to have, they have the law of Moses and the prophets. Let him hear them. Yeah. They're faithful Jews. They claim to follow the law and the prophets. Have them follow the law and the prophets. Why do you need, O rich man, this explicit supernatural intervention? Yeah. Abraham knows. He's kind of being sarcastic here in this parable. He knows that the rich man is going to say that much like him, his brothers did not follow the law and the prophets, much like the particular group of Pharisees that objected to Jesus' teaching about the proper relationship between God and money did not actually follow the law and the prophets when you get down to it. But, the rich man insists, revealing the hand of him and his five brothers. Oh, no, 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 the divine revelation that God gave, public revelation, that's not going to work. But you know what will work? Somebody appearing to them from the dead. Yeah. And Abraham puts it home. That is also an implicit prophecy of Jesus' upcoming passion, death, and resurrection. And keeping in mind, Luke likely wrote his gospel account in AD 59, he might have been just a little bit sarcastic here with this moral that he records Jesus telling Abraham in this parable gave. If they do not hear Moses and the prophets, neither will they be convinced if someone should rise from the dead. In other words, my upcoming resurrection is not going to convince people to repent if they are not willing to do so. This parable is in many sense Jesus's take on a classical tragedy, being the tragedy of the rich man. The rich man had all that God gave him so that he might in death with Lazarus in the place of comfort, but the rich man refused to do so. The brothers of the rich man refused to do so. So it does not matter if the spirit of Lazarus, or as Jesus implicitly hints at the end of the parable, his resurrected form 3 days after he dies on the cross should appear. If they're not inclined to listen to the prophecies that spoke of me, says Jesus, Why should you expect that they'll listen to me and repent from their ways? And with that, I've come to the end of this video. As always, forgot to mention the last two videos. Like, comment, and subscribe. I'm trying to grow my very tiny YouTube channel. Perhaps not to celebrity levels of followers, but I have been feeling better about myself and giving these gospel reflections, and I wish to share it with as many people as I can for the small bits of wisdom that are beneficial that I give in these videos that people might need to hear. So I ask for your help in that endeavor. And with that, we have come to the end of the video, and I will see you next time.